The reason I killed him was because he was a child molester.
One of Britain's worst pedophiles has been stabbed to death in prison.
In the relentless confines of prison, individuals convicted of pedophilia confront a unique array of challenges and consequences. Here are a list of 6 child molesters who met their end in prison. Number 1, John Jokan.
The 65-year-old former priest was arraigned on charges of and indecent assault on 3 children under the age of 10.
Born on June 4, 1935 in Boston, Massachusetts, Jokan grew up in an Irish Catholic family. Tragically, he lost his father at a young age and was subsequently raised by his maternal uncle, Mark Keohane, who was a Catholic priest within the Archdiocese of Boston. Jokan's upbringing within the church would later play a significant role in his access to vulnerable children. Jokan attended local parochial schools and showed an early interest in becoming a priest. After his father's death, he enrolled in Cardinal O'Connell Seminary with the intention of pursuing a religious vocation. However, an assessment in 1954 noted his very pronounced immaturity, raising concerns about his suitability for the priesthood. Despite these concerns, Jokan graduated from the seminary in 1962 and was ordained as a Catholic priest. His first assignment was as an assistant pastor at Blessed Sacrament Parish in Saugus, Massachusetts. It was during this time that allegations of misconduct began to surface. A member of the parish reported to church officials that he had witnessed Jokan bringing boys into his bedroom. However, the parishioner later denied making these allegations, and Jokan continued his work within the parish. It wasn't until 1995 that Jokan admitted to having molested 4 boys during his time at Blessed Sacrament. Jokan's reassignment to different parishes became a recurring pattern throughout his career. After leaving Blessed Sacrament, he was assigned to St. Bernard's Parish in Concord, where he served for 7 months before being transferred without explanation. The lack of transparency surrounding these reassignments would later become a significant point of criticism for the church. In 1967, Jokan was assigned to St. Paul's Parish in Hingham, where a man reported to church authorities that he had caught Jokan molesting his son. This incident led to Jokan being sent to the Seton Institute in Baltimore, Maryland, for treatment related to his pedophilia. However, the treatment seemed to have little effect on Jokan's behavior. The early 1970s marked a turning point in Jokan's pattern of abuse. A parishioner accused Jokan of molesting her 4 young sons. The parishioner reported the incidents to a church official but claimed that she was branded as a troublemaker for speaking out. The church later reached a settlement with the parishioner, further highlighting the systemic failure to address Jokan's abusive behavior. Despite these alarming allegations, Jokan's career as a priest continued. He was assigned to another parish in 1974. However, the pattern of abuse persisted, and in 1980, he was reported to the bishop after admitting to molesting 7 boys. Jokan was placed on sick leave and ordered to undergo counseling, but the church's response fell short of adequately addressing the severity of his actions. Jokan returned to pastoral work and served in different parishes. His crimes came to the forefront of public attention in the 1990s and early 2000s as survivors of his abuse began to come forward and share their stories. The sheer number of victims and the extent of the abuse sent shockwaves through the community and ignited a public outcry for justice. The legal proceedings against Jokan were a pivotal moment in the fight for accountability within the Catholic Church. In 2002, Jokan was prosecuted for indecent assault and battery for grabbing the buttocks of a 10-year-old boy in a swimming pool at the Waltham Boys and Girls Club in 1991. The conviction marked a significant milestone in holding Jokan accountable for his actions. However, this was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the course of his 30-year career as a priest, Jokan was accused of sexually abusing more than 130 boys. The scale of his crimes was staggering, and it became clear that the church's response had been woefully inadequate. The legal battles surrounding Jokan's case exposed the systemic failures within the Catholic Church to address allegations of sexual abuse by clergy members. The scandal rocked the Archdiocese of Boston and reverberated throughout the Catholic Church worldwide. Jokan was convicted of sexual abuse, laicized, and sentenced in 2002 to 9 to 10 years in Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center, a maximum security prison. On August 23, 2003, while in protective custody at the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center in Lancaster, Massachusetts, Jokan met a gruesome fate. Inmate Joseph Lee Druce, serving a life sentence for another murder, took matters into his own hands. Druce trapped Jokan in his cell, jamming the door shut to prevent correctional officers from intervening. He then proceeded to strangle and stomp Jokan to death, leaving behind a scene of brutality. Number 2, Richard Huckle.
One of Britain's worst pedophiles has been stabbed to death in prison.
Richard Huckle was a notorious English serial child sex offender and is considered one of the most notorious child rapists in history. Huckle, who masqueraded as a Christian teacher and freelance photographer in Malaysia, targeted the most vulnerable. Huckle's reign of terror spanned over a period of 8 to 9 years, during which he committed unspeakable acts of sexual abuse against children in Malaysia. His crimes were nothing short of monstrous. Huckle targeted children as young as 6 months old, subjecting them to unimaginable horrors. His sickening acts included digital penetration, sexual assault, and grooming. The level of depravity displayed by Huckle is beyond comprehension, but it doesn't end there. Huckle also engaged in the production and distribution of indecent images of children, perpetuating the cycle of abuse and exploitation. He meticulously documented his crimes, taking perverse pleasure in sharing photos of his heinous acts on a dark web network. These images served as a sick trophy of his conquests, a chilling testament to the depths of his depravity. To further illustrate the extent of his crimes, Huckle belonged to a website called The Love Zone on the dark web, which is obscured from general discovery and only accessible by anonymized means. On the site, he shared photos of his crimes with other members. He boasted about his crimes to other files, posting such comments as, "Hit the jackpot," "A 3-year-old girl as loyal to me as my dog and nobody seemed to care," and "Impoverished kids are definitely much easier to seduce than middle-class kids." This grotesque record-keeping demonstrated his callous disregard for the lives he destroyed. It was a chilling insight into the mind of a predator driven by his own sexual gratification. The full extent of Huckle's crimes may never be known. Despite his conviction on 71 charges of sexual offenses against children, he refused to provide the passwords for encrypted areas of his laptop, leaving countless victims unidentified and their suffering unaccounted for. The sheer magnitude of his offenses is a stark reminder of the urgent need for justice and protection for vulnerable children. The legal proceedings surrounding Richard Huckle's case were extensive and harrowing, as the full weight of his heinous crimes came to light. Prosecuted under extraterritorial jurisdiction, Huckle was tried and convicted in the UK for the child crimes he committed in Malaysia. The sentencing hearing lasted several days, during which the court meticulously examined the evidence and heard the testimonies of survivors. The judge presiding over the case did not mince words when describing the severity of Huckle's crimes. He characterized them as a campaign of rape driven by Huckle's own sexual gratification. The court heard the horrifying details of the abuse inflicted upon the innocent victims, leaving everyone in the courtroom appalled and disgusted. Huckle's conviction was a result of the overwhelming evidence against him. The prosecution presented a multitude of incriminating materials, including the indecent images of children that Huckle had produced and distributed. The court also took into account the ledger he had created, which documented the scale of abuse each victim had suffered. These damning pieces of evidence left no doubt about the depravity of Huckle's actions. The sentencing of Richard Huckle was a moment of reckoning for the survivors and their families. They had endured unimaginable pain and suffering, and now they sought justice. The court recognized the profound impact of Huckle's crimes on the victims and their loved ones. It was a chance for them to confront their abuser and have their voices heard. Ultimately, Huckle was sentenced to life imprisonment on 22 counts of sexual offenses against children. The judge emphasized the severity of his crimes and the need to protect society from individuals like him. With a minimum term of 25 years, Huckle faced the prospect of spending the rest of his life behind bars. The case highlighted the importance of extraterritorial jurisdiction in ensuring that perpetrators cannot escape accountability by exploiting legal loopholes. However, the story of Richard Huckle took a tragic turn in October 2019. He was found strangled and stabbed to death in his prison cell. Another inmate, Paul Fitzgerald, was charged with his murder and later found guilty. The attack was described as a prolonged and sadistic act of violence. Huckle underwent a horrifying ordeal as his hands and feet were restrained, followed by a gag, strangulation using electrical cable, sexual assault, a broken jaw, insertion of a kitchen utensil into his anus, and ultimately, a pen with a blade attached was inserted into his brain through the nasal passage. Paul Fitzgerald's motive for the murder was rooted in a desire for retribution. He wanted Huckle to experience the pain and suffering that his victims had endured. Many people have gone to view Fitzgerald's actions as a form of poetic justice. Number 3, Roy William Whiting. In the summer of 2000, the tranquil town of West Sussex, England faced a dark turn of events when 8-year-old Sarah Evelyn Isabel Payne fell victim to a heinous crime. Sarah, a cheerful girl with a promising future, lived with her family near her grandfather's home, cherishing the joys of childhood innocence. However, a warm July day changed everything as Sarah and her siblings played near their grandfather's house. Unbeknownst to them, a sinister figure observed from a distance, targeting Sarah when she became separated from her siblings. In a swift and silent act, the predator abducted Sarah, plunging the once serene neighborhood into panic and disbelief, ultimately impacting child protection legislation in the nation. News of Sarah's disappearance spread like wildfire, and the community rallied together in a desperate search to bring her home safely. The police launched a nationwide manhunt, with every available resource dedicated to finding the missing girl. Flyers were distributed, appeals were made on television, and the public was urged to come forward with any information that could lead to Sarah's whereabouts. Days turned into weeks, and hope began to fade. The nation held its breath, praying for a miracle. But tragically, that miracle would never come. Sarah's lifeless body was discovered in a field several miles away from where she was last seen. The heartbreak and devastation felt by her family and the entire country were immeasurable. The investigation into Sarah's abduction and murder was one of the most extensive and meticulous in British history. The police left no stone unturned as they tirelessly pursued justice for the young girl whose life was cut short. Among the individuals questioned during the investigation was a man named Roy Whiting. As the investigation into Sarah's disappearance unfolded, the true extent of Whiting's depravity began to emerge. It was revealed that Whiting had a dark and disturbing history as a sex offender, with a predilection for targeting young children. His crimes were not isolated incidents, but rather a pattern of predatory behavior that spanned years. Whiting's modus operandi was chillingly calculated. He would carefully select his victims, often targeting those who were vulnerable or unsuspecting. He would then employ various tactics to gain their trust, using manipulation and deceit to get close to them. Once he had established a connection, he would exploit their innocence for his own twisted desires. The details of Whiting's crimes are too disturbing to recount in their entirety, but it is important to understand the depths of his depravity. His actions were not impulsive or driven by a momentary lapse in judgment. They were the result of a deeply disturbed mind, fueled by a sickening desire for power and control. Whiting's crimes extended far beyond the abduction and murder of Sarah Payne. As the investigation progressed, more victims came forward, bravely sharing their stories of abuse at the hands of this remorseless predator. Each account painted a harrowing picture of the trauma inflicted upon innocent children, forever scarred by Whiting's actions. The trial of Rory William Whiting was a pivotal moment in the pursuit of justice for Sarah Payne and all his victims. The courtroom became a battleground where the prosecution meticulously presented the evidence against Whiting, exposing the full extent of his crimes. Whiting was sentenced to life imprisonment, ensuring that he would never again pose a threat to society. The sentence was met with a collective sigh of relief as the community felt a sense of closure and justice for Sarah and all of Whiting's victims. However, the story doesn't end with Whiting's conviction. Behind bars, he would face his own form of retribution. The nature of his crimes made him a target among his fellow inmates, who sought to deliver their own brand of justice. On August 4, 2002, Whiting experienced an attack with a razor while getting hot water at HMP Wakefield. In June 2004, Ricky Tregaskis, a convicted murderer, was found guilty of the slashing that resulted in a 6-inch scar on Whiting's right cheek. Tregaskis, already serving a life sentence for a murder in Cornwall, received a 6-year sentence for this attack. In July 2011, Whiting was once again assaulted in prison, sustaining a stab wound to the eye. No charges were brought forth by Whiting, leading to no police investigation into the assault. Fortunately, his injuries were not life-threatening. A third attack occurred on November 8, 2018, when Whiting was stabbed by 2 other prisoners in his cell at HMP Wakefield. He received medical treatment in a hospital and was later returned to prison in stable condition. On February 11, 2024, Whiting faced another assault at HMP Wakefield. According to a West Yorkshire police spokesman, a call was received at 5:14 p.m. reporting that a male prisoner had been stabbed. The injuries are not deemed life-threatening or life-changing, and Wakefield CID is currently conducting inquiries into the incident. Ashley James Brofo. Ashley James Brofo was a 39-year sex offender with an intellectual disability. On July 12, 2022, a 9-year young girl was staying with her step-grandparents during the school holidays, and she innocently asked if she could walk their dog alone to the park. Brofo saw her near the park and approached her from behind, luring her with a burger from Hungry Jack's. He took her hand and lured her to his house. Once inside, Brofo assaulted and exposed himself to the little girl. Also in the house was also Brofo's carer, who had seen him enter the house with the child. The carer immediately tried to interrupt the assault by banging on the front door. The girl was able to escape by running back to her grandparents' house to report the incident. Their swift response and the cooperation of the community led to the apprehension of Ashley James Brofo not long after the incident. Detectives from the Child Abuse Squad wasted no time in gathering evidence against Brofo. The seriousness of the allegations prompted them to charge him with several heinous offenses. First and foremost, Brofo was charged with procuring or encouraging the 9-year-old girl girl to engage in sexual behavior. This charge alone sends shockwaves through the community, highlighting the depravity of the alleged actions. In addition to this, Brofo faced 2 counts of indecent dealings with a child under the age of 13. These charges further emphasize the disturbing nature of the alleged crimes committed by Brofo. The thought of a young child being subjected to such indecent acts is truly horrifying. Furthermore, Brofo was also charged with the crime of kidnapping. This charge serves as a chilling reminder of the lengths to which Brofo allegedly went to control and manipulate the young girl. The act of kidnapping carries severe consequences and underscores the gravity of the situation. Ashley James Brofo pleaded guilty to the 2 counts of indecently dealing with a child under 13 and encouraging a child to engage in sexual acts. Brofo was then sent to jail awaiting sentencing. In prison, Evan James Martin, an inmate serving an 11-year sentence for a violent attack on another pedophile, had developed a reputation within the prison walls. He was known for his disdain towards those who had committed heinous crimes against children. Martin, fueled by his hatred for pedophiles, confronts Brofo, threatening to kill him. Martin seized the opportunity when he found himself alone with Brofo in their shared cell. The details of the attack are chilling. Martin, fueled by a mix of rage and a twisted sense of justice, put his arms around Brofo's throat in a front guillotine chokehold. He forced Brofo to the ground, overpowering him with his strength and determination. As Brofo gasped for air, Martin tightened his grip, cutting off the oxygen supply to his victim's brain. He wrapped his legs around Brofo's body, increasing the pressure on his neck until Brofo slipped into unconsciousness. But Martin's brutality didn't end there. He stood on Brofo's throat, using the force of his entire body weight to ensure his victim's demise. The post-mortem examination further revealed the extent of the violence inflicted upon Brofo. He had suffered a fractured larynx and blunt force injuries to his face, torso, and limbs. The brutality of the murder was undeniable, leaving a lasting impact on all those involved in the case. In the days following the murder, Martin's lack of remorse and twisted sense of pride became apparent. He confessed his crime to fellow inmates, laughing about it and expressing his satisfaction with what he had done. In subsequent interviews with the police and the Director of Public Prosecutions, Martin expressed his lack of remorse, stating that he believed he had done some good in this world by taking Brofo's life. He saw himself as a hero, a savior of innocent lives, and believed that eliminating Brofo was a necessary act. DeAndre Austin. DeAndre Austin was a resident of Richmond, California, and committed unspeakable acts of child and sex abuse against his own nieces. These innocent children, who should have felt safe and protected in their own homes, became victims of Austin's depravity. The abuse spanned from 2002 to 2006, a period of 4 years that scarred their lives forever. The girls, who were just elementary school-aged at the time, endured continuous sexual assault at his hands. The trust they had in him was shattered, and their innocence was stolen. It's something that no child should ever have to experience. The impact of DeAndre Austin's crimes reverberated throughout the tight-knit community of Richmond. Families were torn apart, and the sense of security was shattered. Parents became hyper-vigilant, fearing for the safety of their own children. The scars left by Austin's actions were not only physical, but also emotional and psychological, haunting the victims and their families for years to come. The trauma experienced by the victims of child molestation is profound and long-lasting. It affects every aspect of their lives, from their ability to form healthy relationships to their self-esteem and sense of self-worth. The healing process is complex and requires extensive therapy and support. The families of the victims also suffer greatly, grappling with guilt, anger, and a profound sense of betrayal. It's a tragedy that leaves a lasting impact on everyone involved. In 2008, the truth finally came to light, and DeAndre Austin was brought to justice. He faced a trial that exposed the horrifying details of his crimes. The courtroom was filled with tension and anguish as the victims bravely testified against their abuser, reliving the trauma they had endured. The evidence against DeAndre Austin was overwhelming. The testimonies of the victims, along with forensic evidence, painted a clear picture of his guilt. The jury was presented with a mountain of evidence, leaving no doubt about his heinous acts. It was a difficult and emotionally charged trial, but justice prevailed. DeAndre Austin was convicted on multiple charges, including lewd and lascivious conduct with a child under the age of 14, continuous sex abuse of a child under 14, penetration with a foreign object with a victim under 14, oral copulation, and sodomy. The severity and extent of his crimes were truly horrifying, leaving a lasting impact on the lives of his young victims. Given the gravity of DeAndre Austin's crimes, the court handed down a life sentence with the possibility of parole. This ensured that he would never be able to harm another child again. The survivors and their families found some solace in knowing that he would be behind bars for the rest of his life. However, DeAndre Austin met his end behind bars. On that fateful evening, prison officers responded to a distress call of a man down in Austin's cell. Officers rushed to DeAndre Austin's cell after receiving the distress call. They found him unresponsive and immediately initiated life-saving measures. Despite their efforts and the arrival of emergency personnel, Austin was pronounced dead. It was a tragic and unexpected turn of events. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, CDCR, launched an immediate investigation into the circumstances surrounding DeAndre Austin's death. The initial findings pointed to his cellmate Rodney Jordan as the prime suspect in the case. Number 6. Kenneth Parnell. Kenneth Eugene Parnell was born on September 26, 1931, in Amarillo, Texas, during the region's Dust Bowl era and the Great Depression. However, Parnell's childhood was far from stable. His father abandoned the family when he was just 6 years old, leaving him to be raised mostly by his mother. Parnell's mother moved the family, including Parnell and his 2 half-sisters, along with a half-brother, to Bakersfield, California. It was there that his mother operated a boarding lodge, providing a glimpse into the troubled environment in which Parnell was raised. Throughout his youth, Parnell had frequent encounters with the law. He was in and out of juvenile custody for car theft and arson, displaying a pattern of criminal behavior from an early age. These brushes with the law foreshadowed the dark path that Parnell would later embark upon. In March 1951, Parnell's criminal activities took a horrifying turn. He was arrested for raping a young boy and impersonating a police officer. Parnell had lured the child using a deputy sheriff's badge he had purchased at an Army-Navy surplus store. This disturbing incident resulted in Parnell being sentenced to 4 years in prison. On December 4, 1972, Parnell committed his first known abduction. His victim was 7-year-old Stephen Stainer, a resident of Merced, California. Parnell enlisted the help of Edward Irvin Murphy, a co-worker at the Yosemite Lodge where Parnell worked as a night auditor. Together, they executed a plan that would forever change the lives of Stephen and his family. Parnell successfully lured Stephen away, taking him to Cathy's Valley. Unbeknownst to Stephen, Parnell's cabin was located just a few hundred feet from his maternal grandfather's residence. Parnell cunningly convinced Stephen that his parents could no longer afford to keep him and that a judge had granted Parnell legal custody. He even gave Stephen a new name, Dennis, to further manipulate the young boy's sense of identity. For the next 7 years, Stephen lived under Parnell's control, enduring unimaginable abuse. Parnell subjected him to repeated sexual molestation, leaving deep emotional scars on the young victim. The abuse was not the only torment Stephen endured. Parnell's attitude towards him fluctuated between severe beatings and moments of spoiling, creating a twisted dynamic that further manipulated Stephen's emotions. As Stephen grew older and entered puberty, Parnell's sexual interest in him waned. Seeking to build his family with a new victim, Parnell attempted another kidnapping with his mistress, Barbara Mathias. However, this plan failed to materialize as intended. Parnell also involved Stephen in his criminal activities, using him as an accomplice in other kidnapping attempts. However, Stephen intentionally sabotaged these efforts, leading Parnell to berate him as an incompetent. Despite the years of abuse and manipulation, Stephen's resilience and determination to escape eventually led to his freedom. On February 14, 1980, Parnell abducted 5-year-old Timothy White from Ukiah, California, with the help of Sean Porman, a minor and an acquaintance of Stephen. Weeks later, Stephen made a courageous decision that would change both his and Timothy's lives forever. Taking advantage of a moment when Parnell was away at his night shift job as a motel clerk, Stephen escaped the clutches of his captor. Carrying Timothy on his back, he hitchhiked 40 miles to Ukiah, a city unfamiliar to him. Determined to seek help, Stephen turned to the local police, who initially considered him a delinquent. However, a thorough search of missing child posters and a detailed interrogation confirmed that Stephen was, in fact, a missing child himself. As investigators delved into Parnell's past, they discovered his 1951 sodomy conviction, shedding light on his history of sexual offenses. Despite the abuse he endured, Stephen initially denied that Parnell had sexually abused him. This complex psychological response is not uncommon among victims of prolonged abuse, as they may struggle to fully comprehend and disclose the extent of their trauma. In 1981, Parnell faced trial for the kidnappings of both Stephen Stainer and Timothy White. However, he was not charged with sexual abuse. Parnell was convicted of both kidnappings and served 5 years of his 7-year prison sentence. After he was released in January 2003, Parnell's dark desires resurfaced once again. Despite his advancing age and declining health, he attempted to coerce his caregiver's sister, Diane Stevens, into buying him a 4-year-old boy for $500. Parnell's desperation and depravity knew no bounds. Stevens, aware of Parnell's past and determined to put an end to his predatory behavior, cooperated with the authorities to set up a sting operation. Parnell's intentions were made shockingly clear when he requested that the child have a clean rectum, indicating his sexual intentions. He even went as far as paying $100 for a birth certificate, demonstrating his meticulous planning. On January 3, 2003, the day Parnell was to receive the child, law enforcement moved in and arrested him. Parnell's chilling statement to the authorities "I wanted a family," revealed the depths of his disturbing desires and the lengths he was willing to go to fulfill them. The subsequent legal proceedings shed further light on Parnell's true nature. In February 2004, he was convicted on charges of attempting to purchase a child and attempted child molestation, despite no specific child being targeted in this instance. The prosecution successfully argued that the presence of sexual aids and pornography found in Parnell's apartment, combined with Stevens's testimony, provided sufficient evidence of his criminal intentions. Under California's three strikes law, Parnell was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Parnell spent the remaining years of his life incarcerated, his health deteriorating due to diabetes, emphysema, and the effects of a previous stroke. Thank you for watching. Please click on some of the videos you see in front of you now.